My name is Ruby Inouye Shu, and I am 90 years old.
Dr. Ruby. Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind about Dr. Ruby is that's all you have to say, Dr. Ruby. And everybody knows who you're talking about.
I'm very proud of my mom. You know, my mom, all through my years in school, was my idol.
It's important for us to discuss my mom's story because I think she needs to realize that she made a difference.
I know that my children are proud of me that I was the first Japanese American female physician. But when I was starting out, I didn't think I was a pioneer. I was just doing what I was thinking I wanted to do for most of my life, and I feel like I fit in just right for the needs of the community at that time.
For my mother to become a doctor during those times was truly unique in that, first of all, she comes from a culture where women were considered secondary, that women could not be considered professionals.
When I was a freshman at the University of Washington, I was a home economics major. And after one quarter, I said, no, this is not my line. And I talked to my father, and I said, I want to be a doctor. And my father immediately said, are you sure you're a woman? You're expected to get married, have a family, raise a family. But I said, but I'd like to be a doctor. And he didn't say yes right away. It took him a few days to think about it, and then he said, okay, if you want to be a doctor, go ahead and try. My father was very liberal, and even though he had daughters, 4 daughters in a row, he expected us to go to college, and in those days, that was very unusual for our community. My father had been here maybe 12, 13 years, probably worked in a restaurant for a while, then eventually started his own restaurant. So he was very busy in America as an immigrant. Then in those days, we called it arranged marriage, picture bride kind of marriage. And his parents and my mother's parents arranged the marriage. So my mother was 18 years old. She had never seen my father, except by picture maybe. And she was put on a boat, and my father had to send money to the family to buy her boat ticket. So the more money that the father sent to the bride's family, the bride was able to go first class or second class or very low class. And my mother said she was one of the fortunate ones because my father, having his own business, was able to send a little bit more money, so she wasn't in the level way down. The Japanese people, the immigrants, tended to stay together in a community. And I think that we grew up getting used to not being accepted, you know, by the Caucasian society. So I think what helped us through was our friends and neighbors, and you know, the Japanese people in those days supported each other a lot.
Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by air.
I think it was a Sunday, December 7th, 1941, when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. And that's when the world turned upside down for the Japanese American community. Within 2 months, February 19th, Executive Order 9066 came down from President Roosevelt, which initiated actions to intern Japanese Americans who lived in a certain portion of western United States.
The evacuees cooperated wholeheartedly. The many loyal among them felt that this was a sacrifice they could make in behalf of America's war effort.
My generation early on, it wasn't a Japanese characteristic to be rebellious. We were told to obey, and we didn't voice our opinions. Well, at least I didn't, and I think most of my friends. There were a few who did, and now I admire them because they were so right. We were in Puyallup, the Camp Harmony, we called it. So we were there from May to mid-August. Then in August, we were moved to Minidoka in Idaho. From August until the end of January, I was only there 4 or 5 months. During those months, a group of educators, leadership in the universities who were trying to get their students transferred to other colleges or at least continue their education. So at the end of January, I went to University of Texas to finish.
When I was growing up, I remember my mom talking about camp. It was always camp, and it wasn't internment camp, it wasn't concentration camp, it was just camp. And it was very matter of fact. Oh, when we were in camp, this and this. But I don't think we realized that it was a place that they weren't supposed to be, that it was an infringement of their civil liberties by being placed there.
They didn't know what we were doing in camp, but until they started to learn about it in high school or wherever, that's when they started to ask questions.
The Issei and Nisei generation were really ashamed of that experience. They didn't talk about it. It was something really bad that happened to them, and so they didn't talk about bad things. So as a sansei, which is very, very boisterous and kind of, I was outraged.
When people ask me about internment, I don't have the right to talk about internment because I wasn't there long. Just a few months as compared to years for other people. A lot of it stirs up emotions in me because when it actually happened, I think we kept our emotions down. Those years I was in medical school, from 44 to 48, they were terrible years, the war in the Pacific and Europe and all that, That was all going on, but being immersed in medical studies, I was pretty oblivious to it. So. But now when I read it, it makes me shiver.
For the Japanese Americans after World War II, I could only imagine what it was like. I've certainly heard a lot about it.
My friend Kazuko Uno, she graduated with me, and this is 1948. She and I were the only Japanese students in this class, and there were 35 graduates. As soon as graduation is over, then we take an internship, 1-year internship, and we all apply to different hospitals around the country, see which hospital will accept us as interns. When the selections were announced, Kazuko and I, we were the only ones who didn't get accepted at all anywhere. So I remember going to the restroom in one of the rooms and actually cried. But I was talking about that to Kazuko, and she said she doesn't remember it, but I remember it as a discrimination that two Japanese girls graduating from medical school, and we couldn't get accepted to any hospital. But eventually, the dean of the college called different hospitals and got assignments for us. So each of us, I landed up in a hospital in Pittsburgh as an intern, and I think I was a good intern, but
I think for Dr. Ruby, it was mutually beneficial, is that the community needed her and she needed the community, because she couldn't practice if it wasn't for the Japanese American community, I suspect. And so she provided a service that they needed, and then the community provided the patients that she can serve. Yeah.
the Issei's, being Japanese speaking, suddenly they could come to my office and speak to me in their own language. Not that I was good in Japanese, I learned a lot of Japanese from them, and they didn't need an interpreter to go with them. And in those days, to go to a Caucasian doctor and bring an interpreter with you, it's not very friendly or feeling like, you know, you're getting the doctor's advice if you heard it from a third person. So I feel that way I was more help to the community. But I also learned Japanese from them. And most of my Issei patients treated me like I was their daughter or their niece, and you know, they were very good to me.
My mom was a new doctor then, but a lot of them embraced her and, you know, trusted her and let her gain experience on them. And I think most of them were glad that they did. And my mom would always say that my grandma's generation, they all trusted her, but they would kind of treat her like she was a little girl because she was the generation that was younger. And so that she'd go to their houses on a house call and they'd give her candy or something. They knew that she was a doctor, but she was still, you know, their friend's daughter.
Dr. Ruby has been practicing medicine since, I believe, 1949, and over the course of that time helped give birth to over 1,000 babies, of which I believe 75% of them were Japanese American.
I think the last count was something like 1,066.
That is her favorite thing that she did in her practice. Throughout my lifetime, people have come up to my mother and said, "You delivered me, Dr. Ruby, you delivered me." And she just glows.
When my mom was pregnant with me, she went to the hospital in labor and she was in bed, and then one of her patients was admitted who was pregnant and in labor. She climbed out of bed, went out and delivered this baby, and then climbed back into bed to have me.
She was really one of the original superwomen before it was in fashion or common. She would come back from, you know, having a day of patients, going to the hospital, and come back and cook.
Every evening as I drove home from work, I think, now what are we going to eat for dinner? And without even taking my coat off or something, I'd go to the refrigerator and look to see what we could eat for dinner because everybody's waiting for dinner. So it was that kind of family responsibility that I was more conscious of and trying to achieve, because my husband had that style where men didn't do anything and women were supposed to do everything.
My mother was really an old-fashioned doctor, so she went on house calls. I mean, she went on a lot of house calls. Whoever was sick or dying or injured or just couldn't come to the office, she was there. But, she was always available to us, too.
I don't remember her ever telling us, I don't have time, the way that people say it all the time now. She would just try to fit it in.
At an early age, I really got a good work ethic from her. And from work, you grow up a lot and you get your passion, you feel confident.
You're not afraid to go out in the world and, take care of yourself, and you don't feel like you need someone else there all the time for you. You can do it yourself. I think that was sort of her motto.
Well, she was much more than a doctor. I would submit she's a community institution. She had the pulse. She knew the pulse of the community, what was happening, because all of her patients represented all aspects of the Japanese American community. It was back in the early 1970s, I think it was around 1972, is that she actually had proposed a nursing home to serve the Japanese American community. And I think there was a number of things going on at that time within the Japanese American community about doing something for our Issei.
The idea was to have these people give them food that they were familiar with like rice, and speak Japanese to them, whereas in the nursing homes they felt like they were isolated.
Dr. Ruby was very instrumental at the beginning in getting Issei concerns organized, and then over time she has played a number of different roles, from certainly being a doctor to patients or residents here, to serving in leadership role on the board. She's been a marvelous fundraiser. She makes these aprons out of rice bags.
More recently, I call myself the apron lady, and I've been making them in my spare time. And you've heard about the Cairo nursing home. Well, we've sold a lot through there, and I've donated a lot to, their craft sales.
There's a dollar value you can place on it. And certainly she brought in hundreds, thousands of dollars. I couldn't give you the exact figure, but that Dr. Ruby made it. Yes, you may have purchased something that's valued at $15, but it's priceless.
My mother is one of the most generous people I know. She'll sacrifice a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of energy to help others.
They always want to acknowledge her and give her awards, and she doesn't want them. She just thinks, oh, I just did what needed to be done, and other people did a lot of work too. It wasn't just me. And I think it's because she enjoyed doing it.
My mother, after she retired, was very, very active in the community. And, it's been very hard for her to not be able to do as much.
I don't like being 90 years old. I mean, I would like to be 90 years old and like to be active like I was when I was 88 or 89. Because now, this year especially, I went through a serious illness, and it has cut me down a lot. I mean, body-wise, My head wants to do something, my body doesn't want to do it, because I'm slower, I'm shaking, I gotta be sure I don't lose my balance, that kind of. It's hard for me to accept real old age.
I think my mom, as a role model, has been great for us because she's so strong.
she really has a big personality in a little body. And I think that's something that I took from her was I might be little like her, but I could still be a big person.
You can't meet anyone more humble than Dr. Ruby. Yet, what she has achieved over time, what she's contributed to the community over time, she'll never say it. And she's probably gonna get mad at me for saying all these things about her, but there's very few people that can really kind of hit the strata that she does in terms of contributions to the community.
She doesn't want to be put on a pedestal, but I just, think that she should know that she's special.
I'm very grateful to this community, to everyone. There must have been a lot of people who helped me. Just because I became a doctor and had a successful career doesn't mean I did it by myself. I had a lot of help, so I'm very thankful. And that includes God.